Well, good morning. I'm Pete Adrian. I'm the Vice President of ILCSWMA, and I welcome you to our virtual 2021 ILCSWMA conference. Sorry, we're not able to be in person this year at our usual digs at Starved Rock, but we will be back there next year live and in person. That will be November 3rd and 4th, Thursday and Friday of November of 2021. Room blocks are available, I believe, now. I'm not sure how soon, but so I want to thank everybody that's coming in. I know there's a few people that are entering the room little by little, so thank you for joining us. Today is going to be a little unusual. I ask you to follow the navigation on the left-hand side of your screen. You are going to see stage, which is where we are today right now. This will be the main room. When there's no activity, this screen will basically not have anything on it. And then we are going to move after our plenary session to the sessions that are listed on the schedule. There are 2 sessions each hour. You can choose which session you wish to be in by just clicking on that session, and you'll enter that room. Those sessions will go for approximately an hour. When the session is over, it will drop out from the system, so you won't be able to go back to that, but you will be able to move to the next session. And then when the second session is ended for the day, we'll go back to our stage and have our closing plenary with James Jennings. And then we're going to move on to our social hour. Hopefully everybody will stay for that. And we're going to just go over the announcement of the board elections that happened recently. We're going to do a virtual awards presentation, and we're going to follow with a Kahoot trivia game. So hopefully everybody has had some familiarity with Kahoot. If you've got young kids, you probably have, but if you haven't, this could be something interesting. The other issues that we've got to address today are just so you know, there is a chat and a Q&A. Feel free. We'd prefer you use the Q&A for questions to the speakers. The chat is more available to everybody to see. But we will be bringing up questions later in the presentations as the speakers wish to take those questions. So, but please bring them in. All of these sessions are being recorded today. There is a replay button that is on the left-hand navigation. You actually can replay a session as the day goes on. Encourage you to stay in the live sessions, but you can replay. And then those sessions will all be available on the ILCSWMA website shortly after the conference, and we'll have an announcement out to everybody that attended today. We have over 100 people in attendance today, or at least registered. Hopefully they will all join us some throughout the day as they hop in and hop out through sessions and activities. So I hope you find this entertaining and enjoyable. We are going to reconvene tomorrow again at 9 a.m. for a half day of sessions that are focused around a couple other topics. James Jennings speaking about the Illinois EPA's changes in programs such as SHARPS and HHW and tires and a few others. We're going to have some roundtables for educators, a roundtable session for educators, and a roundtable session for enforcement. So hopefully those will be attended by everybody. And then we're going to wrap up with a topic that's kind of up and coming with solar, with the Clean Energy Jobs Acts that have been, I don't get them all right, the names of them, but those are changing some things with energy, and we're certainly interested in learning more about solar use and solar panel recycling, and we're going to have some experts talking about that at the end of the day on tomorrow. So full agenda. We're going to get started here. I'm going to introduce you to our keynote speaker and our plenary session leader. We have Scott Cassell. I'm going to bring Scott on board and say welcome to you. Hello, Scott. Scott Cassell, as many of you may know, is the executive director of the Product Stewardship Institute. He reigns from Beantown, Boston, and his Red Sox are still in it. So much for the White Sox, but the Red Sox might make a go of it. So I'm going to leave it up to Scott to share a little bit about himself and give us some inspirational thoughts leading into our plenary session about extended producer responsibility and circular economy in Illinois. So, Scott, I think you have the mic, and I will add the presentation as you see fit. Let me know when you want to do that.
Okay, I think Sydney is advancing the slides, if I am correct. There you go. Thank you so much for that. And thanks very much, Pete, Kerry, and ILCSWMA for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be with you virtually, but it would be a whole lot more fun if we were in person. I must say, I'm dying to have the conversations in person, but I totally understand the decision here, and other conferences are making the same decision. So soon enough, we'll be in person and be able to enjoy one another's company. But thank you for joining today. Pete did ask me to do something a little bit different for myself. I've made hundreds of these presentations on EPR over the past 21 years for PSI, and I'm going to start with something a little bit different here, which is my personal journey of getting here, and hopefully it's a bit enjoyable for all of you. So when I think about, and I've been thinking and writing quite a lot about this these days, looking back about the organization and my route and how PSI was formed, I think of one word for that, and that is passion. It's a passion for why I do what I do, and I want to encourage you all to think about what you do and have that passion, because it is what drives us, I believe, as environmental advocates. And to make changes, you need to have that passion. The other word that comes to mind is purpose. Each person, each individual has their own purpose. And to figure out what we are meant to do here on this planet for the short time that we have and how we can best do that. And that's something that I've constantly worked on and struggled with and enjoyed and wrestled with. It's as you all know, if you follow the path for yourself, it's not always obvious. But the other thing that comes to mind is when something's not right, to change it. And it's that attitude, I think, that is the thread that brings me to PSI and the organization, because EPR is a major change. And we all need to make these changes in ourselves and in our communities, and just hook up with others that are doing this in order to have monumental change, which has happened here in the United States on EPR. I do want to say there's times we can't change things, and or we can do it in a different way. And I read just this morning as I got up a really sad story about a neurosurgeon, an Indian woman neurosurgeon who's now was teaching in Canada, and she was, I think, 46 when she passed away from ovarian cancer. And the last couple of months of her life, she then, that's something you can't change. She accepted that, but she also changed how she was accepting it. And she then raised almost $1 million for women, those in the LGBT community, and others who are underrepresented in the neurosurgeon field. And so that's doing something about it, seeing something that's not right and changing it even under those conditions. So I was very inspired by that this morning. So my journey does start back in the University of Pennsylvania. And if you can advance the slide, please. This is College Hall, where I remember my buddy Stan at the top of the steps, which you're hidden by the statue a little bit there, but during the student protests, this was 1977, they were protesting some things about the administration. I saw, Stan was there, he was waving everybody in, and the whole place was filled with protesters, student protesters. We went into College Hall and took over the university for a couple of weeks until the demands were met. And that's what I remember about the university. But when I was there, I was not that active at all. I was not an advocate. I was kind of going along for the ride. I was studying psychology, trying to figure myself out, I suppose. That didn't work. So I went to English. I like to write. Well, I ended up having to, for the major, having to study like Victorian authors. And my mind really was not into that either at the time. So after my sophomore year, I was like, what am I doing here? I ended up reading books about a guy named Jack. Next slide. So Jack Kerouac, to me, resonated. This, to me, was where my passion was aroused. I read On the Road, I read the Dharma Buns, the Desolation Angels. These are books, if you've read them, it's about America. It's about what happens in America, all different kinds of people and places in America, from the forests where he was in Washington State, tending a firekeeper out there, all the way to all the journeys he had with Neil Cassidy. And for me, it was like, wow, this is amazing. I have not seen America. I'm going to go and see America. So I then took off from college, much to the dismay of my parents and my brothers and everyone. The only one encouraging me was my friend Susan, who's, as you can imagine, now is with me for 35 years. So it was a good boost for me. But I entered On the Road with Jack. Next slide. Oh, Jack is actually, that was my dog who I had in college. His name was Jackson, actually. I named him after Jackson Brown, but everyone called him Jack. He was the best Frisbee player on the campus, really leaped really high. And Jack and I went traveling around the country. So we started out in Philadelphia, went up the Northeast. We went to New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire, back roads, backwoods, visiting friends, my high school friends. Went into Vermont, and this picture here was taken in Mount Mansfield in Vermont, where I saw the St. Lawrence River up there in Canada. Those are mountains across the border. And then was going into Canada at the border, met a guy, he was hitchhiking. He traveled for a couple of years. I picked him up and he was going to his place in Montreal. So he asked me if I wanted to stay and I said, sure. So I stayed with him. He showed me around the city for a week and we hung out. So we were traveling together. So after Montreal, I then went west to Toronto, which is like a city of glass. That's what I remember. Huge buildings, really modern, contrast to Montreal. And that was really cool to me, opened my eyes. Well, after that, came down through Niagara Falls, back into the United States, made my way down through the United States over to Illinois. And I remember this wonderful concert that I attended. It was Earl Father Hines, was this great jazz musician. He passed away about 4 years after I was there. But I got to attend this great concert and take photographs backstage of all the musicians playing. And that was a wonderful experience for me. And then I got back on the road again and left Illinois and went west. And if any of you have taken that road out there through Kansas, you'll know how flat it was. Well, I've never seen a place that was that flat, that consistent. Telephone poles, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And I understand now how the people are more consistent like that and in the viewpoints because the land really tells it. So went through on, thanks for the big blast there. Those were the stars at night in Nebraska, I suppose. And then came across Colorado. And into the eastern plains of Colorado. It's very low, and then all of a sudden, little by little, the mountains start to rise, and then you're, before you know it, into the Continental Divide. I stayed in Boulder for 2 weeks there, and then went down towards the Arizona and visited in the native communities. Was on the Hopi Reservation, the oldest existing village in the United States, Old Oribe. It is Hopi land, and I had Christmas dinner with a family. Ironically, the family's name was Jackson, so they loved the dog, of course, and we had a great old time. And then I took off, went to the Grand Canyon. And in the Grand Canyon, I ran into, believe it or not, my friends, including Susan. Susan then ended up traveling with me. We went west further, and we came to Death Valley, and eventually all the way over to California, down the coast of Big Sur, where I was in Santa Barbara. And it was there where I finally got, I guess, woken up to environment. I mean, I was in the environment, but I wasn't an advocate for the environment. And that is really how it happened for me. So next slide, please. So here I am, Santa Barbara, after a No Nukes concert from Jackson Browne, was there. There was lots of Frisbees flying around. I guess I could say that my inner passion was really woken up. So what I did then, next slide, please, was come back to University of Pennsylvania, change my major, environmental studies, geology, and finished up. And then next slide, started my journey. I worked for PEC, Pennsylvania Environmental Council, a statewide environmental group, the New Jersey DEP, doing groundwater discharge permits, then to the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority as I moved up to Boston, where I've been now for 35 years, and then landed a great job at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. And that's where I was the Director of Waste Policy and Planning for 7 years, 3 administrations, the liaison with the governor's office and all the different departments. And I realized something wasn't right, and I wanted to change it. I had done 4 solid waste master plans, and the recycling stagnated. I had battery and lamp manufacturers come in. They didn't want to make changes to their products at all. And I realized that I had to start an organization and work with others to basically have more political power than these corporations had for the little state of Massachusetts. Maybe California can do this, maybe New York can do this, but maybe Illinois, but most states cannot. Massachusetts could not. And I then started the Product Stewardship Institute. Next slide. Whose mission is to reduce the health and environmental impacts from consumer products. And PSI was founded on the idea of giving governments a voice, state and local governments a voice on product stewardship, to have the producers take that responsibility, because doing voluntary initiatives, asking them to do better, just did not work and does not work. So it needed to change. Next slide, please. So after a decade of PSI, I worked together with, I remember Walter Willis. It took like 3 years for us to get funding together and to work to develop and found the Illinois Product Stewardship Council. It's a coalition of local governments, state government. Illinois EPA was with us for 13 years. I hope they'll come back and work more closely with the council and PSI. Illinois' EPR advocate is the PSC, and we coordinate that group. And thank you for allowing PSI to do that with the funding that you provide us. And right now we have 17 members. And if there's anything here, a message is please join, because we need collaboration. Things don't happen by an individual state or an individual person or even an individual organization. It takes a whole lot of people to do that. Next slide. So I want to thank the founders of ILCSWMA was a founder and a founding funding for PSI and for all of this group, the council itself, over a decade ago. Swalco, Jackson County, Purdue, DeKalb, Chicago, Ogle, Will, Waste Management, Veolia. These are the ones that got us started, and we have some other funders, and we want to get more to help as well. Next slide, please. So here is the organization. It is a lot of people. We have like 12,000 people in our network. The Illinois PSC is a large part. ILCSWMA is a large part. You're key. You have helped make the EPR movement what it is. And so we have state and local governments. We have with our members. We have partners from the businesses, organizations, universities, and also international governments. Next slide. So I'm going to give a little bit here, and then I'm going to kind of bring us, this is into the policy area. And then just to let you know, give you a little foreshadowing, I'm going to hand it off to Sydney Harris, who's PSI's packaging lead, because she's going to talk to you about packaging. And then Walter Willis is going to come on, say some more words about an initiative in Illinois that he's leading with a number of you and PSI. And that is really bringing us full force into the EPR movement in Illinois. So we work on over 25 different product categories right now. You can see anything from solar panels, mattresses, pharmaceuticals, electronics, thermostats, fluorescent lamps, textiles, you name it. Next slide. Whole bunch of different products. It's all a problem. You know that if it's a problem, if it's in the waste stream, it's a problem. Next slide. And EPR is considered the centerpiece of the circular economy. Europe has mandated EPR as the centerpiece for the circular economy, meaning having value all across the life cycle, creating that value, bringing it back in to commerce. Next slide. Those of you that just need a definition, so EPR, it's a law that extends the producer's financial and often managerial responsibility. It goes upstream past design. It's into mining and the manufacture of materials, then into the production of the product or package, and then post-consumer to reuse, recycling, and safe disposal. Next slide. In 2000, when we started out, this was the map for EPR. There was only on batteries, rechargeable and primary. 7 states had laws. Next slide. By 2021, this should say, there's 124 laws on 15 products in 33 states and DC. You can see where most of the activity is. It's in the Northeast, the Midwest, and the West Coast, not surprisingly. Next slide. Here's the laws just from a bar graph. As you can see, the slope has gone up drastically in the beginning because there was nothing, and now it's steady movement forward. Next slide. Why is it growing? Well, we have a lot of experience now with EPR systems. They are providing sustainable funding. It's saving local governments millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money. It takes the burden off of government. It provides education and the collection and processing infrastructure. And that then increases the recovery of materials so we can bring them back into the circular economy. Creates jobs. There's thousands and thousands of jobs being created here. These are those green jobs. You're creating them through EPR. And ultimately, it is a network of accountability. And it allows us to make better products. We need to give incentives to companies, and Sydney's going to go over that, how the systems are changing right now. We haven't done a great job. We, the whole community, the world really hasn't done a great job in providing the financial incentives. Well, with eco-modulated fees, those will be giving the producer the financial incentive to have products on the market that are less impactful on the environment and social well-being. Next slide. So this network of accountability is really important for me. We call it producer responsibility, but there's responsibility for all these different players. It is the collectors, the recyclers, the retailers, municipalities, the state oversight agencies, and of course the consumers will then have less excuse, I'd say, to not take advantage of systems that are convenient for them. Right now, they're not. So that's where we are at this stage, but it provides that network of accountability. Next slide. Here is the way we develop policies, and it's more complicated. We're going through this in Illinois now on packaging. This is how we've developed all the policies that have turned into laws in the United States over 20 years. We have boiled it down to 16 different elements, and it allows us to educate people and ourselves about things like covered materials. What do you mean by packaging? What's the scope of that? What about the covered entities? Where do you collect these materials from? Is it just households? Is it commercial? Is it schools? That's what covered entity. And we go through this whole list and we have a discussion, we understand, and then we develop the policies, and that's how we can develop consensus around these ideas by boiling it down. Next slide. So Illinois has these 3 laws. Early on, we did not work on mercury switches at PSI, but we did work on electronics. That was one of the early ones that we started out. One of the first ones out of the box in 2000 that our members told us was most important. And then we worked on mercury thermostats. Becky Jane with the IEPA and I and her boss at the time, Kevin, we worked together, and they worked to pass a mercury thermostats law that is still in place in Illinois. Next slide. Well, there was a lot of activity in 2021. Walter will maybe talk about carbon, but he's spent a lot of great energy in bringing this issue, working with the recyclers to introduce a bill that will be back next year as well on the carpet side, but there's bills in Minnesota, New York, and Oregon, and Oregon's one that PSI has developed working with similar recyclers. Pharmaceuticals, there's laws in place in 7 states and 30 local governments, and there was a bill that went very far in Illinois, which will be back again. And then paint is one which we started in 2013. We're not able to pass it then. It's back again. Marta Keen's taken a lead on this, and we'll be working on that hopefully again in 2022. And there's already a model that PSI mediated that is passed in 10 states and the District of Columbia working with the paint industry. Next slide. So I'm going to just breeze through these so we can move on to the other speakers. But you all know the problem with paint. 10% of paint purchased goes leftover. It's about 2.2 million gallons a year in Illinois. If all that were collected, it would cost $17 million every year. It's not, so it's wasted and it causes pollution. And there's great data points we've got from the 10 states in terms of gallons collected, money saved, jobs created, and you have the world's largest recycled paint manufacturer in GDB in Nashville, Illinois. So they would love to pass a law in Illinois to have that supply of paint for them to turn into recycled paint. There's other recyclers like Amazon and about a dozen others around the country that are nearby. Next slide. So pharmaceuticals, again, another opportunity here. Cook County passed an ordinance in 2016. We got to work out the preemption issue on the bill for 2022 here, but hopefully that can be worked out and get a better bill statewide. Next slide. Other opportunities, batteries is huge. The lithium ion, the fires, gas cylinders, there's lots of fires, explosions in recycling facilities, and then solar panels. And we've worked on all 3 of these and are working on all 3 of these. We have models on these 3. And so those are available, and we're discussing these with the Product Stewardship Council as well. Next slide. So bringing this into a landing, the vision, I say vision of the future, it's here. Producer responsibility is here. And we need to now refine it and make sure that these systems work. We want to have a vibrant, well-funded recycling infrastructure and a reuse infrastructure and source reduction on top of that. We need to give the incentives where it's proper. We need to take the financial and management burden off of your counties and local governments and put that onto the producers, and working in a network with the collectors, with the recyclers, and others to make this work. And ultimately, of course, we want to have healthier environment and healthier communities. Next slide. So lastly, just putting this up here, we would love to have more members of the Illinois PSC. I'm speaking for PSI, I'm speaking for the Illinois PSC, which has been a great partner over the past decade. We work on the policies, we bring people together. We hear what people have to say, their positions, their interests. That's the way good policy is made. If you don't show up, we can't bring in those viewpoints, and we need them, and you really need to be heard into these discussions as well. We also do consulting from the research side to pilot projects to facilitations and policy development as well. So with that, I just want to thank Pete again, ILCSWMA, for having me here. And yeah, you can move to the next slide. Thank you, Sydney. And so here is the feature presentation. This is kind of like the movies, which we most, I haven't been to yet, but I can't wait to go to my neighborhood cinema. It's going to open soon. This is the feature presentation, packaging and paper products. And I'm going to now hand it over to Sydney Harris, PSI's policy manager, who has done an awesome job in understanding all the different systems in a dozen different states around the country, and is working with me, Walter, and others in Illinois right now on packaging. Sydney?
Thank you, Scott. Hello, everyone. I'm Sydney, your featured presentation, apparently, so lucky you. I'm going to, as Scott mentioned, talk you through packaging EPR, and that'll provide a nice backdrop for when Walter comes on next and describes what we're doing with him in Illinois. So first, I think many of you are probably familiar with the challenges that the whole country is facing with packaging, but just a quick grounding place to start. We know there's stagnant recycling rates in the United States, and our recycling rate on average as a country hasn't changed over 20 years for packaging and paper products. It's hovering at about 50% and just flatlined. We also know that there's a lot of packaging on the market, and there's only that segment of municipal solid waste is only growing. So we're seeing more and more and more packaging produced every single year. Anybody who's ever ordered a single thing from Amazon knows exactly what I'm talking about, because it's a tiny thing and then it comes in like 50 boxes. We also know that the packaging that we're faced with is increasingly complicated. So, back in the good old days, it used to be you had some glass bottles and maybe you had some steel or aluminum cans. And then maybe you had a couple of plastic items, like 1 and 2, and then, you might have paper. And that was it. It was like 4 main categories of materials. Now we have multi-layer things with 20 micro layers and complicated like inks, and things are compostable sometimes. And so it's a hot mess is what it is. And it's really, really complicated, and our system is not designed to handle these materials. So as a result of that, and also as a result of just the way our system works, which is really just a patchwork of local governments trying to make it work across the country, and they're not always, coordinated. So you could work one place and live another, and the rules about recycling would be different in those two places. So people get very confused, and labels are hard to keep consistent. And so we have a lot of contamination in our recycling stream, and that contamination is a big part of why, the China sword policy came into effect, and they stopped importing our materials because they were so contaminated that they were effectively mostly trash, and we were just sending trash abroad and expecting people to do something with it. So there's been immense disruptions to the global recycling markets. It's not just China, it's many countries that we ship our materials to or used to. And obviously that has had immense ripple effects on recycling markets here. So we all know those are very volatile. And this is the packaging challenge. It's enormous. To meet these challenges, the rest of the world went ahead and passed packaging EPR laws, as early as 30 years ago in Europe and some countries in Southeast Asia, and they have really spread all over the world. And as of last year, in 2020, we were still kind of not on this map in the U.S., but this year, in 2021, we actually had the first 2 packaging EPR laws passed in the United States. So we're going to have to update that world map because we're officially on there now with Oregon and Maine's new laws. And we've had so much activity at the state level across the country. We've had at least a dozen state bills introduced, and I think they really more would have passed had it not been for COVID closing some legislatures early in 2020. And, there's so many other priorities now with the pandemic. But we're still seeing a ton of momentum for packaging EPR because the problem is only growing. And so we expect many more bills to be reintroduced in 2022. In addition, there's been federal political activity on this with the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which was introduced in 2020 and reintroduced this year, and it's going to keep coming back. There's a lot in that bill. I encourage you to read it. It's a little long, but it's good reading. At the center of that bill is an EPR for packaging program that would be national. And then, of course, there's other features like a national bottle bill, certain bans. There's a moratorium on plastics production facilities. So there's a lot going on in that bill. But really at its core, it's national EPR for packaging. And that has really helped to bring the conversation into the mainstream. So I want to tell you a little bit about how exactly EPR for packaging works. And you'll see PPP on a bunch of these slides. That just means packaging and paper products, sometimes packaging and printed paper. But basically, not all paper stuff is packaging, but it still gets recycled in the same stream. So we include those things together. So this is a schematic that shows a lot of information, but hopefully you can see my mouse. I think you can. If you start over here, you're a consumer in this system as an individual, and let's say you order a vase online, or Halloween's coming up. I like to say let's say you order a cauldron online because you're going to make some Halloween potions. So the cauldron comes to you in a box, and it has those air-filled plastic pillows, and it also has some styrofoam peanuts. And those things are dealt with in various ways. The cardboard box is recyclable, so it's going to go in your recycling bin, which hopefully you have access to, but not everybody does. A truck is going to come collect that stuff, and then it will be sorted and processed at a MRF, and then it will go to a paper pulper, and it will be remade, ideally, into a brand new box that's made of recycled content, and the circular economy continues. With the air-filled pillow, that's not yet recyclable, but under EPR, there's opportunities to fund research and development and new infrastructure to try to bring things into the recycling stream that aren't there yet, if we find that they are useful and still needed. The foam peanuts are not recyclable. They're going to go in your trash can. They're probably going to get landfilled. But, in an EPR system, there are also opportunities to phase out things like foam peanuts that maybe we just don't need anymore and don't find useful and don't have the environmental outcomes that we want to see. And so the way that works is back over here where you ordered your vase or cauldron. Vases Inc. in this scenario, or Cauldrons Inc. or whatever, the producer of the product that used the packaging, they have to pay to put that on the market. So they pay a fee on all of these packaging materials, and they pay that into a producer responsibility organization that's going to be an entity that the producers form together to kind of handle the program for them. That organization exists to collect money from all the producers and consumer brands of these packaged goods. And that money is used for many different things. So over here, you see the money that they paid on that pouch pillow thing. That might go to that research program that I mentioned, where they're trying to figure out if these are so useful, to prevent our products from breaking and shipping, how can we make them recyclable and bring them into a circular economy? The money is also going to go to the recycling system. So it's going to cover the cost of, collecting and sorting and processing and remaking that cardboard into a new box. That either can flow through, local governments for running the programs, or sometimes in some systems, it means the producers are directly funding recycling and kind of handling the management as well. And the PRO, Producer Responsibility Organization, is also going to contribute to tons of other things. They're going to contribute to consumer education on proper recycling so that you know what to do with your plastic pouch, pillow that needs to go into this pilot program, and that you know that your cardboard needs to go in the bin. They're going to contribute to expanding that infrastructure. If not everybody has access to recycling right now, then we need to pay for more infrastructure so that people have that access so we can collect more materials. It's going to go to developing end markets for those materials so that we can actually make this box into a new box or what have you. And it's going to go to the state as well to reimburse them for their cost to oversee and enforce the program, which is really key. So a lot of information in here. I'm sure you'll get the slides after and you can sort of go over this with a magnifying glass, but there's a little overview for you of how this system can work. And I like to boil it down to 5 key pillars. Scott showed you a table with 16 elements of how we build policy, and those are all critical when we're going through a bill. Every single one is important. But conceptually, it's helpful to think about really 5 major pillars of EPR. And the first is legislation. So you have to have a law. This is not a voluntary program. You need the law to level the playing field and make sure all consumer packaged goods producers are paying into the system fairly. You need to know who is responsible, what packaging are we talking about? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? Is it just residential? So these definitions and program boundaries are really important, and we need a law. The next is financing. So of course, this is a lot about money. It's about making producers pay into the system, but how much are they going to pay in and how is that money spent? Those questions are critical. And that's how we increase recycling rates, because the recycling system gets sustainably funded by producers. So for example, Belgium's had an EPR for packaging system in place since 1994. Their PPP, packaging and paper products, recycling rate is 92% as of last year, and their contamination in their stream is under 10%. I think it might be 8%. In British Columbia, Canada, their system's more recent, since 2014. Their recycling rate is still at 90%, and their contamination rate is already under 10%. And again, comparison in the US, our PPP recycling rate's about 50%, and it's been there for 20 years. Our contamination rate is consistently over 25%. So by comparison, we're not doing great. And one of the major differences is the funding that has come into these EPR systems in these other countries. The money that comes in also goes to market development, as I mentioned. So a few examples of that. In British Columbia, they manage 99% of the plastic packaging in their program in the province, because Recycle BC, that producer responsibility org that developed there, they invested a lot of that program money that they paid into the system into developing end markets in the province. That creates local jobs. It keeps things accountable because it's very traceable to see where things are going locally. So huge deal over there for them. And then in Quebec, on the other coast, their producer responsibility organization has invested millions of dollars to develop end markets for 100% of the glass packaging. And that was their goal. They were like, we're going to have markets for every glass package in our system, every bottle, everything. And they have invested so much money into developing those. In Europe, they've got this trade organization that's kind of pan-European, and it is really working hard to develop markets for flexible packaging. So those like foam pillow or pillow pouches, etc. So a lot of discussions around where the money goes and what kind of markets we're developing there. Another key pillar in EPR for packaging is roles and governance and oversight of the program. These are, of course, really tremendously important. So who's making decisions day to day in an EPR system? A new tool that has arisen, especially in these US bills, is a multi-stakeholder advisory board. So really getting lots of opportunities, formal opportunities for stakeholders across the value chain to provide input into the program. And then the state government has a critical oversight and enforcement role, and there need to be options that are clear and roles that are clear for local governments as well, who've been, of course, working on recycling since it began and have a lot of that institutional knowledge. So there's a whole spectrum of program models that falls under this kind of roles and governance pillar. bills in the US have fallen everywhere on the spectrum. So, we have some states like Vermont that have been really exploring what we call full EPR, which, gives more of the management of the program, makes producers responsible for more of that management, which harmonizes the system more across the state, but also leaves a little less day-to-day management to local governments. On the fully other end of the spectrum, we have a reimbursement model where producers don't do really any management of the program. They just pay in, and governments get reimbursed for their work. This is what we have seen in Oregon and Maine's laws that have passed this year. And then, there's options in the middle as well that kind of take the best of both worlds, and there's options all along the spectrum. So I mentioned Oregon and Maine a few times. They're the first two laws, so they're getting a lot of attention. Both of those are reimbursement systems, but they pay, they're really different. They pay different amounts. They cover different amounts of the system costs for recycling. They cover different products. Maine is focused on packaging. Oregon included food serviceware and paper products. And both are going to have significant state rulemaking that will go on to determine more details of the program. And they also both include incentives for recyclable packaging and recycled content. And that kind of brings me to another pillar of EPR, which is we want to drive change. We don't want to do this just for fun. We want to do it because we need to see a change in the packaging that's being put on the market. We need it to be more sustainable. We need things to be designed with the environment in mind. We need enforceable performance goals and convenience standards for that recycling access. The things at the bottom here, these are, they're not technically EPR. Like, you can ban a product without having EPR in place. You can say packaging has to have recycled content to a certain percentage without having EPR in place. But these things are very complementary to packaging EPR, and so they often get discussed together. And of course, they can be worked into the same piece of legislation. So the way that EPR provides those, drives change and provides those incentives is through what we call eco-modulated fees. So I'll walk you through quickly a little bit of what that looks like. So historically, EPR systems have charged producers right at the beginning, like Vaz's Inc. gets charged for the packaging they put on the market. But the most basic way they do that is they just base it on what type of packaging material are you using, how much overall weight or how many units, usually it's weight, but the total amount of packaging you're putting onto the market, and what does that material cost to recycle? And that's net cost, right? Because if it's bringing in revenue, that would detract from the cost. So then they put, fees on everything that you put on the market based on only these things. And in theory, that's going to incentivize using less material, because the less you put on the market, the less you pay overall. And if it's easy to recycle and has high market value, then it's cheaper to recycle. So that will incentivize those things as well. Of course, if it's reusable, that should be incentivized as well. But doesn't always work that way in practice. And, EPR has been around for packaging for 30 years in some countries, and we haven't seen it work as well as folks would like it to for those environmental outcomes. So the system is now moving and evolving to what we call eco-modulated fees. The goal of those is to really tweak those environmental incentives and drivers through financial signals with credits and penalties. So, for example, maybe it's more expensive to use packaging that has carbon black in it, which is that dye that makes black plastic and is not viewable by an optical sorting machine at a MRF. So it often causes a lot of problems in the stream. It doesn't get really readily recycled. It also is hard to take black plastic and turn it into clear plastic. So it has limited recycling markets. Maybe that costs more in an EPR system, and so you're disincentivizing it. Maybe something with recycled content cost less. Maybe you get a credit when you put that on the market. So this is how we are tweaking the economic formula to try to incentivize environmental outcomes. And there is, of course, we love a spectrum. There is a full spectrum of ways we can do, fee modulation in EPR systems. So you could have the most basic format. You could have just incentives, so just the carrot, and maybe it's just some credits for some good packaging, if you will, and then maybe Further down the line, there's some penalties for bad packaging, and that has to be determined by the system and what outcomes you want. And then, of course, some systems are looking at even broader policy goals. Are you decarbonizing your whole supply chain? Maybe you need credits and penalties for that. And then on the side, as we mentioned, there are extra things you can do, like have a mandated minimum threshold for recycled content or ban certain problematic things. So that's kind of how we drive change in EPR systems. Some examples from Europe, we've got one company in Italy responded to Italy's eco-modulated fees by changing from plastic packaging to this cardboard like pallet thing. It's 100% recycled content. They eliminated all their plastic and they now only have a single material in their package, which makes it easier to recycle again. And bonus, they found out they could fit 80% more. These are like shower or window curtain rod ends, and they could fit like 80% more of them onto a shipping pallet. So that cut their energy and carbon footprint as well. In Belgium, we've seen eco-modulated fees trying to incentivize refill opportunities. And so we've seen some companies switch to refill dispensers in stores. And then the last pillar of EPR that is really fundamental is equity and environmental justice. And there's so many ways this shows up in these policies, but we're talking about expanding recycling access. What does that really mean? Access to the program means translating educational materials for consumers into all languages that communities speak, so everybody knows what to do with their stuff. It means physical accessibility of collection infrastructure. It means geographic distribution is equitable of the recycling system. And then, of course, making sure end markets are responsible, making sure they're not polluting the environment or harming people who work in those systems. And then there's economic opportunities in recycling that need to be considered, including the informal sector, independent contractors and non-full-time employees, making sure people have living wages, making sure those are like safe places to work. And some bills have included, producer funding for litter cleanup. So maybe there's job opportunities there that continue to allow people entryways into the system. So a lot of ways that equity and environmental justice show up in these policies. And those are really important. But to bring it in for a landing for you all, EPR really supports municipalities by minimizing your waste management costs. That also helps taxpayers because it's minimizing their waste management costs. Creates recycling and resource management jobs, usually in the community, at least in the state, and it reduces the health and environmental impacts of packaging. So pretty good stuff, but it also, of course, isn't the only solution. And I always mention that, again, there are complementary policies that are needed in a suite of policies to get to a circular economy. But we believe EPR is the foundation, and it's really a first step that must be taken if we're going to get there. So with that, I actually want to turn it over to Walter.
Thanks, Sydney. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Sydney, you do an excellent job of explaining a complicated topic, and I do learn something every time you give a presentation. So really appreciate your knowledge there. My opening comments are really timing is everything, right? With the plastics in our waters, all the plastic manufacturers are concerned and talking circular economy. We had the national sword, as Sydney pointed out, got us all frazzled about our programs and are they sustainable? And then we have Maine and Oregon passing EPR for legislation or for paper products and packaging. That's groundbreaking. So to me, the time is now. And that's why my agency is very energized about this prospect. This is a game changer in Illinois by shifting that responsibility and cost. The city of Chicago just signed a 3-year contract for their curbside recycling, $80 million over those 3 years. That cost would be shifted to the PRO under a reimbursement model, just taking over the program. In Lake County, we spend $16 million a year on our curbside recycling programs. That's a significant cost shift and responsibility shift. And as you know, with the Materials Management Advisory Committee effort that we worked on very hard, a state plan, and I've done planning in Illinois for, since the 90s. There's the haves and have-nots. We try to write these plans, as Scott was saying when he was in the state of Massachusetts, and nothing happens because there's no funding, right? So with this, it's a game changer. Downstate, the rural counties, the other counties that don't have really robust programs would have access, would have programs. So this would significantly change the landscape in Illinois. Post-consumer content. I mean, you look at the value of recyclables right now, you listen to the big publicly traded companies, they see the power of recycled content requirements. It's going to create markets. There is no doubt about it. Performance goals. You know, we've been stagnant, as Sydney said. I've had the same recycling rate since I've been at Swalco. I've been trying all these things. But at the end of the day, we need to do better with our performance goals. And that should be something that we should be striving for. You know, British Columbia, 85% recovery. We're nowhere near that. And the social equity, as Sydney pointed out. So really the process that, you know, how are we going to bring this legislation to Illinois? Well, we're going to have to work together. And ILCSWMA is, you know, introduced us to PSI, right? So it's a very important link. So what we're doing is we've hired PSI to help us develop a very thorough and well thought out piece of legislation with all the key stakeholders having the input at some point in the process. Right now, we've got a core group, and the key funders there are on the top right now. You know, my agency, DuPage County, and the City of Chicago have started funding. I plan to fund another $10,000 in my budget, which hopefully gets approved later today. So we're looking for, you know, our core membership right now. You know, our focus is to get the ball rolling. And then to expand, can we go to the next slide, please? You know, kind of our engagement strategy is, you know, we're going to, as local government, you know, focus on getting our priorities straight and harmonized, right? But then, you know, we're going to start reaching out really quickly to obviously ILCSWMA and our government partners, but also the Illinois EPA, the Illinois Environmental Council, the retail merchants, you know, Illinois Municipal League. We need to strengthen our base as strong as we can, right? And then, you know, we'll continue to engage with other key stakeholders, you know, the waste industry. I've let people at NWRA know that, you know, we're looking at this. This is no secret. They see what's happening across the country. The Illinois Manufacturers Association, you know, obviously, with the state plan we wrote with the MMAC, we talked about EPR, and so this is going to be no surprise to them and the other brand owners that this is something that we're serious about, and we intend to be very transparent and engaging with the stakeholders, because ultimately, getting this type of legislation passed will not be easy, but our goal is to get a bill drafted with that input as we move along, to have filed in the January or whenever the filing deadline is for 2022, we will get a bill filed, hopefully, and then we will start to work that bill and start to educate the General Assembly about it and the other stakeholders. So that's our goal. It's probably a several-year effort, but I feel very good about the energy we have, and really, as Sydney pointed out, all those problems we have with our current system, I think can be addressed ultimately with EPR for paper products and packaging. So I'm excited about it, and I'm going to turn it back over to Sydney.
Awesome. Yeah. We had this in here as well to just mention the project timeline, you know, as Walter mentioned, could be a multi-year effort. Sometimes it takes a few years to pass these bills, but our goal is to introduce a bill for 2022, and that's what we're working towards. So, you know, we've kicked off our project this fall, and we're working on a summary that, you know, we can send around to folks in the coming months, and we will be doing that targeted stakeholder engagement that Walter mentioned on the previous slide. And eventually, you know, we're hoping to do, you know, some subject matter hearings in the legislature. And if that doesn't happen, we'll do a stakeholder workshop. But we really want to get that broad stakeholder input and then continue strengthening this coalition to support this bill. But with that, we wanted to open it up to the audience for questions. And oh, there's Scott. And so we've got, a couple things you might have questions about on the slide, but of course we're open to any questions that anyone has. So please ask away.
This is the interactive part. We can't call out people individually, but and we can't ask you to step up to the microphone. But I guess this is the sort of version of that. Step up to the microphone, send something into the. I guess you want them in the comments section, right, Pete?
Yeah, that would be ideal. We've got about 65 people viewing this presentation, so there are people out there. I can't tell if they've all got their cameras operating and are in the room, but if there is anything, otherwise, I guess we could, maybe facilitate a few questions internally here.
Yeah, I got. If nobody else has a question, I got something for Sydney. So in Oregon and Maine, can you talk about the opposition and how that was overcome, or not? Obviously it was, but do you have any kind of understanding of where these manufacturers, the brand owners, the waste industry, et cetera, were on these bills?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was different for each state. They had a different process for bill development in each state. So Oregon, just going left to right, Oregon led the state environmental agency led a multi-year, I think it was a 2.5-year stakeholder engagement process that they facilitated, and they brought local governments and waste management folks and others to the table there, and kind of went through a very methodical process with them. There was a lot of research, reports that came out of that. People presented to that group, and that committee really worked on figuring out a model that would work for folks in Oregon. Now, of course, not everybody was happy with the result. Some environmental NGOs felt like that they weren't heard as much. Producers, the consumer brands, some of them felt like the bill isn't what they totally wanted. So when no one's happy, that's when you're doing your job. So, it was a long process there, but it was led by the state. And there was still opposition to that bill, of course, when it was introduced. Producers have opposed EPR for packaging forever. We have only seen very recently a shift in some of their thinking, and it's not uniform. It's not all producers. And so we definitely saw some testimony in opposition to that bill. But it was largely, I think, neutralized because there was such a long stakeholder engagement process, and that was really key. In Maine, the effort was first started off with, in 2019, the state passed a resolve that actually directed the state agency to come back the next year with a bill for EPR. So in 2020, they were obligated to come back with an EPR for packaging bill. And so they did. And so it was a state agency bill first. But then, of course, 2020, everything went sideways. And then there was a lot of opposition from producers and other groups in Maine who didn't like the model that the Maine bill put forth. It was an unusual model. It's very controlled by the state agency there, more so than some existing EPR programs. And so there's a lot of emphasis on state rulemaking and state sort of input in the day-to-day, and producers didn't like that because it's a lot less flexible for them. So there was obviously some pushback there. And actually the bill was reintroduced in 2021, and that became more of an environmental group bill. The state was still supportive, but took more of a backseat in 2021. So interesting differences, state to state. But, we do see opposition from producers still sometimes. However, we've also, for the first time, seen producers testify in support of EPR bills. That had never happened before, but it did happen this year in Maryland for their bill. And they tend to support the bills that give them more flexibility. So those are some of the big takeaways there.
If I could just add a second here to what Sydney mentioned. So stepping back, the Maine and Oregon laws were passed in the way that they were because producers were not at the table at that point. We've been working with the producers. We've tried to engage with them for 15 years. And for most of that time, they did not want to engage. It was only after the China sword, where the recycling rates in all your communities went skyrocketing, where the political will was created in the state agencies from the local problems that have happened. And so you need to look at it in that context. So it was actually Maine, it started with the governor's office, and also in Oregon was the governor's office, not necessarily only the state agencies, but they had the governors there. In Maine, they got a lot of pushback, and the governor then gave it off to, really had an environmental group run it the last year with support from the state. But that's something to consider. The thing you have going for you here in Illinois is that more producers are at the table, as Sydney mentioned. In Maryland this year, the first time ever, the Flexible Packaging Association, Ameripen, and the Campaign for Recycling in the Environment either supported or did not oppose. First time ever in 15 years. So you've got a lot of ground that's been plowed here, and that's why the process we have is inviting them. We're working in Connecticut now with those groups, and other producers will be joining as well to that. So you're set up quite well here to bring in more of the players. So I want to ask Pete, there's some questions coming in the comments section, and then there may be a Q&A, which I know I can't see. I don't know if
the Q&A is not functioning, so we just need them in the comments. That's correct.
All right. So do you want me to go through these comments and see how to answer them, or would you like to do that?
No, please. If you see something,
say something. Okay.
Please.
All right.
There was a question, Scott, about vape pens. I don't know.
Vape pens. Yeah. Well, I can handle that one, and then you can take the one, the EPR for plastic packaging. How's that?
Sounds good.
All right. So Jen Jarlin has asked about the vape, the e-cigs with lithium batteries. Well, we are developing or refining our model for batteries. So on the battery side, so a couple of notable things. Washington, D.C. Just passed this year the first all battery EPR law. All battery meaning primary single-use batteries in addition to rechargeable batteries. Rechargeable do include lithium ion. The one thing they did not include, which many other states want to include, are the bicycle batteries and batteries that are used in other products. And I think that's really, there's new in scooters and all sorts of mobile types of equipment. And so that's the next stage of batteries. The EV batteries could either be included or maybe in a different type of EPR system, but that's where things are moving, not only here in the US, but globally as well. So the vape pens, we have looked at that, and that's one of the other products that we're looking to include. Again, if you all think that should be included in PSI's model or want to have a bill introduced in Illinois on batteries at some point to include them, that is, like to hear others' viewpoints on that as well. Sydney, over to you on the plastic packaging.
Yeah, so the question from Claudia Jackson was, does this bill include EPR for plastic packaging also? So yes, the thing about packaging EPR is that it is not material specific. So it's really important actually to include packaging of all material types in the system, because they all get recycled in the same bin most of the time. And we don't want free riders in the recycling system to the extent we can avoid it. So it will include plastic packaging as well as packaging made of anything else.
I'll just take Jen Jarlin's follow-up question about batteries that are not removable. Great question. It's one of the things. Oh, there you go. Nice. Thanks, Pete. I bet that's you working your magic back there. So there are a lot of batteries. First of all, batteries in products, so battery containing products is a big problem, where like toys, for example, or medical devices, or even power tools, sometimes they're sold with the battery included. And then when people are done, they throw out their product and the batteries in it. So we have included those, and DC has included battery containing products. Now, the batteries that can't be removable is another problem. And there had been originally in original law in the 90s for NICADs that those batteries had to be removable. And this is one of the things that I'd like to see if that we need to return that for all types of batteries. So that has been a real problem as well.
I see a question from Sarah. What is the Illinois EPR, there you go, bill in 2022 going to cover? So great question. The short answer is we don't entirely know yet, because we have to decide as a group together, but likely it will cover any type of packaging, as I just mentioned, made of any material that covers products that are sold directly to consumers, or either in a retail store or online. So any kind of packaging that you as like a person are generating at home should be covered under this system. Likely also some printed paper like flyers and brochures, possibly newspaper, we'll see. And then the question is going to be for Illinois, as it is with every state, does it also include packaging from places like schools or public parks, or private, like commercial locations, like office buildings or restaurants? And so that really depends on each state's unique recycling system and how that looks right now. So those are some questions we'll be figuring out together.
So Joy has asked if Walter can talk more about the effort and contributions, and saying not everyone needs to come up with $10,000. So Walter, you want to talk about the effort for contributions to the dialogue, please?
Sure. I didn't mean to imply that was the threshold, but it's a $50,000 scope of work to get this done, the work that needs to be done. And so really we're looking for others that can give any amount, to be honest, to help with the effort. And once you become a funder like that, then you get a seat at that core table as well. And not trying to be in a little exclusive little group there, but we're totally going to engage with people that aren't funding on this call. Somebody has to get the ball rolling here. So yeah, it's contact me, wwillis@swalco.org. If you want to talk about that more with me and the rest of the core group, the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
It's your chance to be a leader in more ways than one.
And I think there was, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say Kurt Busey, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, mentioned, why not more deposit bills for all packaging types? Isn't that a form of EPR? And you're absolutely right about that. So it's sort of a form of EPR. We consider it like a grandparent of EPR. So let me say that there are 10 states that have the bottle bills. When we're doing these EPR bills in those states, there's sort of a red line, down the middle here, and saying, okay, what's in the bottle bill right now, that will be with the bottle bill. And there's enhancements in the bottle bill in many of those states. So increasing the nickel to 10 cents, expanding it to small little containers and juice and so forth. So that's what's happening. In other states where there is not a bottle bill, you have to think about what is the bottle bill means. It's a deposit return. It's an incentive for consumers to return their materials. And there may be a need for consumers to have that incentive on some products that are becoming litter. I mean, that's how this whole started with the bottle bill. And that's something to consider within the context of these systems. But I think it could be something to discuss, because there's quite a lot of concerns around having to take those materials out and then put it into like retail. A lot of them are retail based, rather than, at the curb and in the current recycling system. So I think it is a discussion that needs to take place in our dialogue as well, but focused on containers and how best to increase those recycling rates. Right now, the nickel is getting, like here in Massachusetts, I ran the bottle bill for 7 years at the state, and it went from like in the 80% to 40% right now. And so that's why they're kicking it up to 10 cents again. So it's a return mechanism on a specific amount. There is a resurgence of interest on bottle bills around the country. Connecticut passed an enhancement. Massachusetts is going strong. There's also a federal bottle bill that will be introduced soon. So now we have to be discussing it in some way in Illinois, but it is complicated in terms of the finances, what you're taking out of the bins and how it's being returned in different places. And so, from a municipal perspective, of course, what you pay in the recycling depends upon the value that is in that bin that goes to the recycler who you're contracted with. So it's quite complicated, but it's a great question.
I'd like to add another aspect to that. We've tried to run bottle bills in Illinois for many, many years. There's a very strong coalition against bottle bills in Illinois. So, and mainly the retail merchants, you don't want those materials shifted to them if they were to become the redemption points. So we have a dynamic there where one of our key partners on packaging EPR might be the retail merchants, because they would rather see that than a bottle bill. So if we try to bring the bottle bill into this, we have to be careful about the political dynamics that we unleash. So it's a bit tricky. But to me, as far as I'm concerned, the bottle bill has some impacts. Like Scott is saying, we take the aluminum and the plastic PET out of the curbside programs. The waste companies aren't necessarily going to like that. And would they come back to my municipal members and say, well, we lost that material, we have to raise your rates. That was a change in law. We want more money from you because we don't have that valuable material anymore. So there's a lot of dynamics that come into play with the bottle bill. So it's complicated. There's no doubt that states with a 10-cent bottle bill definitely recover a cleaner, more material than non-bottleable states do. There's no debating it.
I'll also add, Kurt, you got us going, that outside of beverage containers, I as a consumer, I'm not trying to pay a 10-cent deposit on every cardboard box that I receive, right? And I'm not going to drive them to a return facility. So it's also tricky to think about, I think practically there's a limit to what we can put a deposit on. Like, it can't be every form of packaging that I then have to take to different places to return. So it's tricky to think about where those limits are. And as Scott and Walter mentioned, it's also complex when you get into the waste management side of things and the value of those materials. But it's a really important question. And I also just wanted to mention that in Canada, their bottle deposit systems are run as EPR systems, but the difference is that they're run by the producers. So the beverage industry is involved in those bottle deposit systems. The way we do them here, it's not really product stewardship because the producers aren't doing anything. They're not paying into the system for the bottles they put on the market, and they're not investing in infrastructure for recycling. I think that's the key difference, is it puts more of the responsibility on the state or the local governments to manage it with that consumer funded deposit. And philosophically, that's a distinction. But of course, both policy tools are really important and they can work together.
One other thing, since it is such a big topic, and it's mentioned here, California's bottle deposit program is considered, I think, what I'm hearing is one of the worst, one of the ones that's most problematic. Oregon's, on the other hand, is one of the best. And so what has not happened yet, which I've offered and would like to see, is have the bottle bills more harmonized, and to the best practices. And This is where Susan Collins from the Container Recycling Institute's done a fabulous job over the years in educating and promoting. It has a lot of knowledge about this, but that's one thing that hopefully will happen, is that the bottle bills that need help are being changed to make them better, to meet the best practice standards, and any new ones will incorporate those and be introduced, and then complemented with EPR. And so we have to figure out how to do them together. They can go together. They go together in Canada. They go together in Europe. It's complementary systems, and the depots for the take back in Canada, for example, are used for other glass materials that are even not part of the bottle bill, or it could be used for even small electronics or textiles where they have those expanded. And we have a partner out there, Encore Pacific, Alan Langdon, who has done a great job there over the past couple of years expanding those. So we need to think about infrastructure in a different way, and these EPR systems allow us to do that. Jen Jarlin asked here about crowdsourcing. It's a good idea for those that, the crowdsourcing for the funding for this. I have not done that. I don't know if there are others that have, that would think that might be a possible way to do it, but coming out to the public and others, these issues are ones that all the public, as you know, they relate to. They hate the plastics that are coming at them. They have nothing, they don't know what to do with, or they can't take them off the products. So this could be an opportunity for us. There was also a question from Tessa Murray. I don't know if you know this, Walter, but did Chicago come out in support of the bottle buyback program recently?
I believe their plan does talk about the bottle bill. I know an alderman has talked about running a bottle bill in the city of Chicago. Again, that will create some havoc with the retail merchants who could be an ally on the EPR for packaging. So we'll see how that plays out. I kind of like Kat's question too, Sydney. How does the education work? Is it the PRO's job? Are they going to give us money to educate locally, or how do we do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends on the program model that we end up choosing for Illinois. So in some programs that are more on that full EPR side of the spectrum, maybe I can flip back to that if it's not going to make everyone dizzy, but do it the fast way. In some programs, the producer is actually doing the management of the program. And so they are here on this full EPR side of things. So they are actually putting out the educational materials. They're paying for billboards. They're paying for ad campaigns. They're putting flyers in people's mailboxes that they're paying for. They got their graphic designer on it. So in some programs, it's like that. In other programs, they're doing some of that, but they're also paying local governments to continue doing the work that they've already been doing for years to educate their residents. And it really is a back and forth. In other programs, the producers aren't really doing any of their own materials. They always have to have a website. So, you can find their website. But in other programs over here on this end, it's really more of like the local government is doing what they've always been doing, and they're just getting a reimbursement check basically from the producers. So it really depends on the program model. But education is super important. So it's going to be part of the conversation.
We do have some slides here. If you've run out of questions, or you can certainly keep putting them into the comments section. But Sydney, if you can go to the end, there you go. We can, what we'd like to do, as Walter said, is to involve all of you. And this is perhaps the opening of that, letting you know what's taken place in Illinois of all the products, and then zeroing in here on packaging. And so what we've done with the group so far, and we've only, met, I believe it's one time, we're in the beginning stages. And so this is part of PSI's method as well, in terms of engaging stakeholders, is to establish a baseline. And, the way I think about it is that we're all kind of building a house together, and you have your foundation. You need to have a firm foundation before you build up. And the design of the structure is what we're developing now through all those different boxes that Sydney and I were talking about, and leading the group. And frankly, we have the process, but you all have the materials, if you will, and how to design it. So that's how we go together. And this is the baseline. This is the foundation, working on what we call the problems of packaging, the goals we would want to achieve, and then the barriers to overcome those goals. And then the solution, of course, at this point is EPR and the benefits. But this mantra is what we are going through. And we can share with you just some of the, starting with the problem, and see if it jogs any things for you, because we all need to be on the same page. If there's something that I've learned a lot in doing this, is that if we're not all focused on the same problem, then you can't have a solution, because it's a multiple problem where people aren't agreeing on it. Sydney, if you can go to the next slide, please. So, here's, and I think we have maybe 2 pages on this, but this is just kind of basic stuff. We haven't fully put it into Illinois-centric language, which we need to do, all of us, in order to get the attention of others, and we'd like your help. So, for example, 40% of MSW is packaging and paper products, and there's consumer confusion. There are volatile markets, but the municipal costs is what we'd like your help on. Here, we know that from our discussions, the city of Chicago said their costs increased from $24 to $37 million last year, due to the restriction on the markets. That's a data point. That's a talking point. Lake County, 14 million annually. DuPage, 2.5 million. If you have data, please send it to us. Send it to Sydney, Walter. That's important information for us. And we'll eyeball it for the whole state. We have other states like Connecticut going through this. It's actually a commissioner's effort there in Connecticut, and they're at $30 to $40 million that they know they've calculated. Maine was able to calculate about 18 million. And in Connecticut, it's 30 to 40 million. They have 3 million people there. So you have probably double that. I think it was in Chicago. It's 3 million. It's 3 million in just Chicago. So you can see that eyeballs it there about right. So having the data points is really important. And then, the recycling goals is mentioned here, the lack of access in some of the rural areas. And then we have another slide as well, I think. Yeah. Getting no financial incentive yet, which EPR will bring, no control that you have over what's placed on the market. You have pervasive litter and garbage, that you have to clean up because of this, particularly plastics. And then, limited choices. We want better products on the market. So now's a good time if you want to just throw a couple of ideas to add to this or clarify into the comments box, and we can add them in. And then if not, we can go through the rest of it or get whatever you want to talk about. But this is an opportunity to start engaging with us, walking down that path of developing an EPR bill for packaging.
Scott, I do want to point out that as part of your scope, you're working on a project summary, which will lay a lot of this out, which will be a kind of a document that we'll share freely with everyone on this call or this meeting, so that you get a sense of the problem, our approach, et cetera, with that project summary. So hopefully that becomes something you can share with your elected officials, your leaders, and start to get some momentum going locally with your area. So that's when Sydney put the pressure on. Is that a couple weeks out or?
Was muted. Yep. We'll have that to you soon. We are going to circulate it through the core team of folks that we've already assembled first. So before we circulate it more broadly to folks on this call, but I think that will certainly be the next step.
I don't see any more questions coming in. Maybe we've worn you out.
Well, Kat had a comment, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Standardizing acceptable materials could help consumer confusion. Sydney, it looks like a good one for you to address.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's part of the tension between a more harmonized statewide system and a reimbursement system, because if we just reimburse governments for what they're doing now, we are, in some senses, perpetuating the status quo, and that is a fractured, fragmented system that's very confusing for consumers. But if we go with a producer-run system, some folks are not comfortable with having local governments not run the system, but it ends up continuing, it ends up, producer-run system reduces contamination and confusion, and that's what we've seen in existing programs. And Quebec, has run their reimbursement style system for 15 years, and they're now transitioning to a producer-run system, and that's exactly why, because it did not allow them to standardize materials statewide or province-wide. So they were hitting a plateau in terms of their recycling and recovery rates and their success, and they were getting frustrated with that. There are ways in the middle, though, like on that spectrum, as we talked about. So, Oregon has come out with a reimbursement system, but they will also be putting a task force together across the state and coming out with a universal recycling list for Oregon. So there are other ways to do it. That one's going to take a lot of time, but it will ultimately help with reducing that confusion and making things more streamlined.
We can go to the next slide, go through some of these just to give people a taste. Sydney, maybe you can go through the goals, please.
Sure. Yeah. So as we talked about already with our core team, we want a system. We have a lot of goals for the system that we're building in this bill. We want a system that reduces the environmental impacts and costs of packaging, including from litter, but not just from litter. We want to internalize those externalities that we're facing right now. We want to incentivize environmental performance like toxic-free packaging and resource-efficient packaging. We want to treat all materials according to their highest and best use. So, Illinois has a waste hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle. We've all heard of it. We want to be doing those things in that order. We want to increase diversion rates, of course, right? We need to see those recycling rates and diversion rates go up. We want to create green jobs and business development opportunities in Illinois. We want comprehensive consumer education and awareness and clear labeling on things so people are clear. We want sustainable funding for reuse and recycling infrastructure and research and development, like we showed in that diagram, to bring things into the system. We want to maintain, enhance, and expand the current system. So, that's going to include ideally recycling access for 100% of people living in Illinois. They don't have that right now. Not everybody has access to a recycling program in the state. Especially we want to, improve multifamily unit recycling access, but also large parts of rural Illinois don't have recycling programs. So we need both of those things. We need sustainable markets for end markets for materials, so that we're actually creating a circular economy and things are being remade into new things. And we want to have, recycled content and sustainable sourcing up in that product design phase. So a lot of goals. But, this is the vision, and it's really, really important. And I do see some questions. They're not directly related to the goals, but I don't know if we want to pause here and just address those.
Sure, let's do that. Yeah, Simrata, thank you for adding to the problem statement here, which is another thing that we can add is the microplastics getting out into the environment. Huge problem, health issue. Production, use, and disposal issues. So thank you for that addition. And then Brian Zimmerman is asking about the typical phased-in timeline, which is one of our elements, Sydney, on the packaging EPR. Do you want to give a little sense, like when a law passes, then what's happening here? How does it go? Law passage, stewardship plan, submittal, approval, etc. How many years out is that?
Yeah, really good question. And of course, there's not one standard answer because it depends on each bill and the timelines and deadlines that you set in the bill. But, for example, the two laws that passed, I think, are each going to take several years, like 4 to 5 years for those systems to be fully up and running. And there's a lot of lead time. I mean, in Maine, as I mentioned, their program is going to really heavily rely on the state agency. So the state agency needs to hire some staff and get them, up to speed. And that's going to take a year or two to get that funding in order and, get everything ready at the state level. They have a lot of state-led work to do. So the program is going to depend on the timeline they're able to meet there. And then producers are going to have deadlines to meet, get an organization together by this year, get a plan in place to run the program by this year. But it will take about 5 years, I think, before we really see a fully up and running, like humming along system in Maine, and probably similar, maybe a little faster in Oregon, maybe 4 years, but pretty similar. It doesn't have to be that way. I think the more flexibility you leave to the producers, obviously the faster that can go, but there's always going to be a year or two of program startup time. That's just what it is. I mean, they have to take a look at the state and see what the state of the recycling system is right now, figure out the funding needs. That's just going to take some time, of course, and they have to form an organization, probably get it registered as a nonprofit, hire some staff, get all the producers who are obligated to join the organization. So there's just a lot of important things that have to happen at the start. But I think there is a little bit of variability in that time frame, but it's probably a few years.
But the good news is they know how to do this, right?
Yes, they do.
30 years of experience. We know how to do the eco fees. There's a lot to that. I think the biggest challenge is the gap analysis, right? Where do we need recycling? How much is it going to cost? What are we going to provide rural areas? Is it drop off? Is it curbside in towns with over 5,000 people? I mean, so there's a lot that goes into that to me. But
yeah, absolutely. And that's usually called a needs assessment. And so most of the bills you're seeing now have like a 1 or 2 year needs assessment. That's kind of step one, right? The state's getting itself ready. Everybody else is getting themselves ready. And meanwhile, the producers form this organization and they have to fund this needs assessment to do that analysis. Once we have that information, we can kind of get going. But as you said, Walter, like this isn't starting from scratch. These programs are running all over the world. The same companies are in compliance with those programs all over the world. So they do know how to do this.
And the other thing to think through here is that Maine and Oregon are the first out of the gate. They're pioneers. And so their actions here are now resulting in or causing the producers themselves to coalesce around a stewardship organization. They have to figure that out, how that's going to work, and to set that up legally, those systems. But once that is done, they're not going to want to do that in every state. There'll be a national system that Illinois could take advantage of. So I do think that the time frame that Maine and Oregon are under now will be slightly longer than what you would have to face coming next in line if it's 2022, 23, et cetera. There'll be a lot of the ground that is plowed, a lot more learning, but these systems are in place for up to 35 years in Europe and over 15 years in Canada. A lot of experience, how the producers are supposed to pay. There's consultants that have figured this out with some fancy data management systems and financing systems. So it really is just a matter of figuring out, what we want to do, what you want your system to look like. Kat has asked a question about biodegradable plastics. And Sydney, I know this is another one that we've been involved in here. I wonder if you can talk about that and sort of what might be needed in order to resolve some of the concerns and how to bring some of those materials into an EPR system or not, block them out if they're causing contamination.
I saw this, and I'm assuming, Kat, that you're saying to like add this to the problem statement, in that it is certainly an issue right now, causes a lot of contamination and confusion and sort of messes up the recycling and composting streams. So definitely we can add that to the problem statement. In terms of covering like compostable or biodegradable packaging, I would say by default, those items would be covered under an EPR for packaging law because, well, if they're packaging, it doesn't matter what they're made of, they're covered. But one of the issues that we're hearing from folks is in that field is that they don't want to pay into that system if there isn't going to, the system isn't going to fund composting infrastructure that can accommodate that stuff. So that's definitely a tension point because we also hear from governments who just don't want that stuff in the system at all. And to that, maybe it needs to be banned in that case. So there's definitely some various ways to deal with that. I think on the one hand, you could just ban it all. On the other hand, you could have the EPR system try to disincentivize that. Or you could have the EPR system sort of stay financially neutral with those fees, right, of eco-modulated fees, but it could have some covered costs be investing in composting and separate collection for stuff like that. It's definitely an education issue as well and a clear labeling thing because there's so much out there greenwashed to say and make you think that it's compostable or biodegradable and it's really not, and there's inconsistent certification, so it's definitely a bit of a mess, but different ways to address it with EPR.
Yeah, this is one of, I'd say at least two areas that we're working on right now. And so our organization, we do research, but we also try to facilitate an understanding of issues like this that are not well understood. They're definitely a problem and it will be put into the problem statement. But what we try to do is to go beyond that as well and to say, okay, how should these materials and packaging be handled? Because there are a lot of manufacturers that are making this stuff, putting a lot of investments in it. And, we want to be able to say one way or another, is this okay? Is it not okay? We don't want to be keep complaining about it, right? Being a problem in the waste stream contamination, we need to figure out what to do about it. Which ones are okay? Which ones are not okay? Under which circumstances might it be okay? Closed loop recycling or composting systems. So we need to be clear about it. And so if you're involved in any of the organizations, this is one to contact us about because we're doing some work in that area and we'd like to do more. Another one, in addition to this, is this technology is called chemical recycling, also sometimes called advanced recycling. So we're doing research on that right now. I know there's a lot of concerns around that. Is it lean, and there's a whole range for these technologies. There's millions and millions of dollars being invested, facilities even making, plastics and other products out of plastic products right now. And so is it more like mechanical recycling where it could be okay in terms of recycling, or is it more like taking that plastic, burning it, creating energy, and it looks more like a waste to energy plant, which in most cases people are going to say that's disposal. All of that is being called chemical recycling right now. And so we're looking at that and trying to figure out how to approach that from a policy perspective, particularly in these EPR bills. It's another thing, if you'd like to get some more involvement in that, you can contact us as well.
Yeah, just to add real quick, the U.S. Plastics Pact, which was formed over a year ago, and both PSI and Swalco are members of, and a lot of the brand owners, they've endorsed EPR for plastics, and one of their goals is by 2025, 50% of all plastics packaging will be either composted or recycled. Most of the focus has been on recycling, but there's a lot of stuff MRFs don't want and will probably never want, and candy wrappers, chip bag wrappers, all that kind of stuff. Could that be compostable someday? So I think we're going to have to keep this on our radar, Sydney. I like the idea. I think compostability of plastics is not going away. but it's not as well formed as you would, if you will, as the recycling of plastic. So definitely something I think we should be focused on in our bill.
Maybe we just run through the last couple of slides here just to finish them up so people see, we've got, certain barriers. They're similar to the problems, but even deeper, there could be, political resistance that, of course, is going to be out there and maneuver around, understanding about EPR, just the concept, how things work. The investments, sunken investments by the waste management industry and sometimes by public agencies as well. How do we handle those? There's a misperception that costs will increase for consumers. We have not seen that, and these systems are going to be more efficient and create a lot of value. There's critical relationships that need to be built with stakeholders. We'll see, it could be an opportunity, right? As opposed to just a barrier. There's a short legislative session in 2022. And as we talked about, multi-year is the mindset we have to have. If not this year, then it's going to be next year, et cetera. And then, someone had raised on one of our calls, just the resistance to, those socialists out there, out there in Canada and the European Union. We have to be careful with those analogies. Well, there are systems that are working, and actually all the other programs that we've passed in the United States do draw on lots of these experiences. That's the barriers, and then I think we have one more slide on here's the benefits, and I think we've really talked about these before. And the other thing just to emphasize is this is a greenhouse gas reduction initiative. This is a climate change strategy. And we all need to be thinking about it that way. We often think, well, the batteries, the storage of batteries and collecting those is part of it. Yes, it is. Or vehicles themselves are using electric vehicles and electric mobile products, or it's the coal-fired gas plants. And so, yes, that's important too, but the life cycle of products is extremely important, and reuse and recycling and source reduction can lower the greenhouse gas impacts. And so we all need better data on that, but we need to be thinking that way and including it as part of a climate change strategy. So I think that might be it. That's our slides. It should have both of our names sitting on this, but I don't know if there are any last questions here. You've asked some great questions, great engagement for a virtual audience. I want to thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Sydney, for joining me here. And Walter, Walter's an honorary board member of PSI here for a number of years, and he's been just a great leader in Illinois on all of these issues. And we look forward, Walter, to working with you on packaging. And back to you, Pete, for bringing everyone back over to the next session.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Scott and Sydney and Walter. Much appreciated. I know we did a pretty deep dive into this today, so that's great. Okay, we've got a little bit of time before the next session begins at 11. Again, when you see this screen kind of go away when we stop this broadcast, you'll go over to the session tab on the left-hand side, and you can select that, I believe, and choose a session that you want to go into. We're getting set up in those rooms right now, and of course, working through some technical endeavors there. So be patient with us. We'll be back. The room will look a little different. So, but I do want to thank everybody again. Great session. Again, these will be recorded, have been recorded. They'll be available on the ILCSWMA website and for rebroadcast today if you wish to, off that left-hand panel. All right, I'm going to end this, and we'll take a short break and be back at 11 a.m. Thank you so much, everyone.